The forgotten birth of England. The idea of Englanda, proud and powerful nationes, something we often take for granted. Its name rolls off the tongue as if it has always existed. And yet, England, as a united land under a single crown, is younger than we imagine. Forged through blood, betrayal, fire, and faith. Overshadowed by the larger history of Great Britain and the sprawling empire that followed, the birth of England itself is often left in the dark corners of historical memory. But, make no mistake, before Britain became great, before the Union Jack was ever raised, there was England. And, to understand how it came to be, we must return to the time when giants ruled in stone cities, when wolves still roamed the wilds of Britannia, and when the island's fate rested in the hands of foreign tribes sailing in from across the sea. Cut to a map of Roman Britain slowly disintegrating as the legions withdraw. The fall of Rome, the island abandoned. It is the early 5th century. The Western Roman Empire is collapsing under its own weight, stretched too thin, decaying from within. On the fringes of its reach lies Britannia once, a prized Roman province, a gem that sparkled with villas, roads, and walled towns. For nearly 4 centuries, it had lived under Roman order. Cities like Londinium, Eboracum, and Verulamium bustled with trade, culture, and military precision. But now, Rome is bleeding. In 410 AD, Emperor Honorius sends word to the cities of Britain. They must look to their own defenses. The legions are gone. The eagle of Rome no longer casts its shadow over the island. The people of Roman Britain, known today as Britons, are left to fend for themselves. What follows is a slow unraveling. The roads fall into disrepair. Villas and towns are abandoned. The knowledge of Roman engineering, governance, and military structure begins to fade like mist in the morning sun. And into this vacuum of power, a new threat emerges. From the north, the wild Picts of Caledonia raid down into the fertile southern lands. From across the Irish Sea, the Scots launch attacks from what we now call Ireland. The Britons are outnumbered, unprepared, and leaderless. Desperate, the native rulers make a fateful decision that will change the future of the island forever. The Anglo-Saxon arrival. Welcome becomes war. According to legend and to chroniclers like Bede and Gildast, Britons invite foreign warriors to aid them. These are Germanic mercenaries, tall, battle-hardened men from across the North Sea. They come from tribes known as the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes. Their homes lie in the harsh lands of what we now call northern Germany and southern Denmark. They come to protect the Britons, and they come willingly. In return, they are promised land. The first of these warbands arrived sometime around 430 AD. Led by chieftains with names like Hengist and Horsa, they prove themselves formidable warriors. They repel the Picts and push back the Irish raiders. For a time, there is peace. But peace turns sour. The foreign mercenaries begin to demand more land, more payment. And when the Britons refuse, the swords come out. The guests become conquerors. Villages are burned, towns are pillaged, temples are desecrated, entire communities are erased. Thus begins a period the Britons would call the Saxon Terror. Cut to flickering torchlight illuminating battlefields, screams in the dark, flames engulfing a Roman villa. Over the next 2 centuries, waves of Anglo-Saxons pour into the island. They bring with them their own gods, their own language, their own customs. The Latin of the Romans disappears. The native Brittonic language is pushed westward, into the highlands of Wales and the moors of Cornwall. Paganism takes hold once more. Christianity, which had flickered under Roman rule, nearly vanishes. The newcomers carve up the land into small tribal kingdoms. There is no central authority, no united identity, just warlords, war bands, and war. But out of the chaos, something begins to form. The Heptarchy. 7 crowns, 1 island. By the 6th and 7th centuries, the landscape of early Anglo-Saxon England begins to settle, though only slightly. 7 major kingdoms emerge, known to historians as the Heptarchy. 1. Northumbria, a vast northern kingdom, born from the union of Bernicia and Dara, known for its fierce kings and rich monasteries. 2. Mercia, centered in the Midlands, a warrior kingdom that would one day rival all others. 3. East Anglia, land of the East Angles, marked by flat plains and rich farmlands. 4. Wessex, the West Saxons, in the south, destined for greatness. 5. Essex, East Saxons, often overshadowed but powerful in their time. 6. Sussex, South Saxons, coastal warriors, and early raiders. 7. Kent, the oldest of them all, and the first to embrace Christianity. Each kingdom had its own king, its own court, its own struggles. Sometimes they fought one another, other times they formed uneasy alliances. Borders shifted with every battle, power moved like the wind. But beneath this fractured landscape, something deeper was happening, a cultural unification. The Anglo-Saxons began to see themselves as separate from the Britons, the Picts, the Scots, and the Welsh. They spoke a similar language. They followed similar customs. And as Christianity returned to their lands brought back by missionaries like Augustine of Canterbury, they began to form a shared religious identity as well. The seeds of England were there, waiting, growing in the blood-soaked soil. The first hints of unity. One of the earliest attempts at true overlordship came from King Ethelbert of Kent, who ruled in the late 6th century. Thanks to his marriage to a Frankish Christian princess, Ethelbert welcomed Roman missionaries and became the first Anglo-Saxon king to convert to Christianity. Under his rule, Kent became a center of learning and faith. The establishment of Canterbury as a religious hub would shape English Christianity for centuries. But it wasn't until King Edwin of Northumbria in the early 7th century that we see a serious push for wider rule. Edwin was baptized a Christian and brought the new faith deep into the north. He also united much of the island under his overlordship, at least for a time. Edwin was killed in battle, however, and the dream of unity died with him, at least for now. Cut to a storm rolling across a map of the 7 kingdoms. Flags rise and fall in rapid succession. Over the next century, power would pass from Northumbria to Mercia. Under kings like Penda and Offa, Mercia dominated central England, building dike walls, commanding tribute, and challenging the influence of the church. But Mercia, too, would fall. Power, as ever in these lands, was fleeting. In the far south, another kingdom was rising. Small, quiet, and often underestimated Wessex. It would be here, in the lands of the West Saxons, that the story of England would truly take shape. But before Wessex could rise, a new storm was coming. It would arrive from the cold, gray seas of the north, the Vikings. The Vikings and the last hope of Wessex. Opening scene: a stormy North Sea. Black longships cut through waves like knives. The rhythmic drumbeat of oars rises above the wind. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms had begun to take root. For all their wars and shifting borders, a cultural fabric was beginning to form a language, a faith, a people. But history is not kind to comfort. And just as the old world seemed to steady itself, it was shattered by steel from the sea. They came not as traders or settlers, not at first. They came as predators. They brought no armies, no kings, only axes, fire, and fear. They were the Norsemen, the Danes, the heathens. We know them now as Vikings, the raiders from the north. It began, like so many great disasters, with a single act. In the year 793 AD, the remote island monastery of Lindisfarne was attacked. The holy men were slaughtered. Sacred texts were torn. Gold was stolen, and word spread like wildfire. The devils had come from the sea. This was not just a raid, it was a symbol, a warning. The Viking Age had begun. From Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, longships descended on the coasts of Britain like ravens upon a carcass. They struck with terrifying speed, raiding monasteries, coastal towns, and river settlements. Riches were taken. People were enslaved. The church once, the backbone of Anglo-Saxon life, was left reeling. And worse was yet to come. These were not random pirates. Not for long. The raids became organized. The war bands became armies. The Norse came not only to steal but to stay. The Great Heathen Army. In 865 AD, a massive force landed in East Anglia. This was no mere raid. It was an invasion. Led by legendary Viking warlords Ivar the Boneless, Ubba, and Halfdan Ragnarsson, sons of the fabled Ragnar Lodbrok, this host would come to be known as the Great Heathen Army. Their goal was simple: conquer the kingdoms of England. One by one, the old Anglo-Saxon powers fell. East Anglia submitted first, buying peace with horses. Northumbria, once the jewel of the north, was ripped apart. Its capital, York, was taken and renamed Jorvik. Mercia, mighty Mercia, fought hard but lost ground. Its kings fell like dominoes. Only one kingdom remained, a stubborn little land in the southwest. The kingdom of the West Saxons, Wessex. The rise of Wessex. In 871 AD, a young man named Alfred became king of Wessex. He was not born to rule. He was the youngest son of King Æthelwulf. He had no army ready, no empire to inherit, only a small, tired kingdom surrounded by fire. The burden placed on Alfred's shoulders was immense. He was not just defending Wessex, was defending the last hope of Anglo-Saxon England. The Vikings came, wave after wave. Battles were fought across southern England at Reading, Ashdown, and Meritoun. Alfred lost some, he won others, but he held the line. Then came the darkest hour, the Wilderness King. In 878 AD, the Norse made a sudden strike in winter. Alfred was driven from his court. His kingdom collapsed. The Vikings controlled nearly all of England. Alfred fled into the marshes of Athelney, a desolate, boggy wilderness in Somerset. There, cold and alone, he hid with a handful of loyal men. Legend says he disguised himself as a peasant, that he burned cakes while hiding in a villager's hut, that he prayed not for victory, but for the wisdom to save his people. This was not a king on a throne, it was a king at the edge of despair, and from that despair came something greater than any crown. In the wilderness, Alfred planned. He gathered support, and when spring came, he struck. The return of the king. Alfred emerged from hiding with fire in his heart. He rallied the local militias, the Fyrd, ordinary men who picked up spears and axes to fight for their homes. He forged new alliances. He reorganized his forces. Then, at Edington, Alfred met the Viking army in open battle. The fighting was brutal. Shield clashed against shield. Spears flew like rain, but Alfred's strategy, his timing, and his relentless spirit turned the tide. He won. The Viking leader, Guthrum, surrendered, and in a move that shocked the world, Alfred did not execute him. Instead, he baptized Guthrum as a Christian and gave him land in return for peace. This land would become known as the Danelaw eastern and northern parts of England under Viking rule. But the west remained Saxon. And Alfred was no longer just a king. He was a legend. Alfred the Great, the father of England. Alfred did not rest after victory. He knew the peace was fragile. The Norse could return, and so he began building not just defenses, but a nation. He constructed fortified towns across Wessex to resist future invasions. He reorganized the militia system, making it more responsive and better trained. He built the first real navy in English history, small fleets, designed to intercept Norse longships at sea. He established a legal code, blending Christian ethics with traditional customs. He promoted literacy and education, translating Latin texts into Old English so that the people could learn. Alfred called himself not just King of Wessex, but King of the Anglo-Saxons. He dreamed of a united English people, one nation, under God. A dream not yet realized, but closer than ever before. The road to England. Alfred died in 899 AD, having never seen England united. But his vision lived on. His son, Edward the Elder, expanded the kingdom's borders. His daughter, Æthelflæd, Lady of the Mercians, led armies and recaptured lands from the Danes. Together, Edward and Æthelflæd began to chip away at the Danelaw, one town at a time, one fortress at a time, and their legacy would pass to Edward's son Æthelstan. Æthelstan, the first king of England. Alfred laid the foundation, Edward the Elder built upon it, and Æthelflæd, the Lady of the Mercians, shelled the flame through storms of war and loss. But it was Æthelstan, grandson of Alfred, who would do the impossible. In a land broken by centuries of division, torn by Viking wars and petty kingships, Æthelstan became not just a ruler of men but the maker of England, the orphan who would be king. Æthelstan was born around 894 AD in the shadow of chaos and rebirth. His father was Edward the Elder, son of Alfred the Great. But Æthelstan's mother, Ecgwin, was of humbler origin, perhaps a noblewoman, perhaps even a commoner. Because of this, Æthelstan grew up partly apart from the royal court, raised in Mercia under the watchful eye of his aunt, Æthelflæd. It was there, amid Mercian fields and fortresses, that Æthelstan learned the art of leadership not from lords, but from legends. Æthelflæd, his aunt and mentor, was a warrior queen. She led armies, she forged alliances, and when she died in 918 AD, her people looked to Æthelstan as their hope. He was just a boy, but already he carried the weight of kingdoms, a crown in shadow. When Edward the Elder died in 924, Æthelstan was not the obvious choice to succeed him. His half-brother Ælfweard, son of Edward's later marriage, was crowned in Wessex. But Ælfweard died mysteriously just weeks later. A power vacuum opened, and in that uncertainty, the nobles of Mercia crowned Æthelstan their king. Wessex, ever proud and cautious, hesitated. For over a year, Æthelstan ruled Mercia alone, carefully building trust, avoiding civil war. Then, in 925, he was crowned King of the Anglo-Saxons in a grand ceremony at Kingston upon Thames. It was the most sacred ritual of kingship since Alfred. And in Æthelstan's eyes, it was not just a coronation, it was a declaration. He would not just rule the realm, he would unite it. The unifier. The Danelaw still loomed in the north. Norse lords held cities like York. In the west, the Welsh resisted. In the north, the Scots were proud and independent. But Æthelstan was relentless. He made peace with Welsh kings, then demanded their tribute. He married his sisters to European rulers, forging diplomatic alliances across the continent. He turned warlords into vassals, offering silver with one hand and a sword with the other. And in 927 AD, he marched north to York, the last major stronghold of Viking rule in England. York fell. the Norse lord Guthfrith fled, and for the first time in history, an Anglo-Saxon king ruled over all of England, from Cornwall to Cumbria, from the Thames to the Tweed. Æthelstan was king. The imperial court. Æthelstan's rule was not only one of conquest, it was one of culture, reform, and vision. He gathered the greatest scholars of the age at his court. He issued legal codes harsher than those of his predecessors, determined to bring justice and unity to his new kingdom. He promoted education and literacy, inspired by Alfred's dream of a learned people, and he embraced the idea of Christian kingship not just as a ruler by blood, but as a servant of God and guardian of divine order. Foreign kings respected him. European courts sent gifts. Chroniclers called him Emperor of Britain. And yet, his greatest test still waited on the horizon, the Battle of Brunanburh. In 937 AD, a great alliance of enemies rose to challenge Æthelstan's rule. The King of Dublin, the King of Strathclyde, and Constantine II, King of the Scots, united to invade England. Their goal: break the unity Æthelstan had built, tear apart the crown before it could take root. The armies met at a place called Brunanburh, exact location lost to time, but its memory etched in legend. It was a titanic clash. Shields splintered, banners burned, the battlefield was soaked in blood. Æthelstan fought not only as a king, but as a warrior. Alongside his brother Edmund, he led the English line himself. The slaughter was so immense, poets would later call it the greatest battle since the Romans had left. The victory was total. The invaders were crushed. England had stood firm. Legacy of a king. Æthelstan died in 939 AD, just 2 years after Brunanburh. He left no sons, only stories. But his legacy was profound. He was the first true king of England, not just in name, but in power and unity. He turned a fragile dream into a living nation. Chroniclers would write, "No king was ever more just or more learned, none ever ruled so vast a realm." But Æthelstan's reign was not just about kingship, it was about vision. He saw a land not of tribes and tongues, but of people bound by law, by faith, and by hope. Closing scene: a quiet countryside. Children play under a castle shadow. Farmers till soil that once ran red with war. Narrator, soft, reverent tone. Before Æthelstan, England was a promise whispered in the dark. After him, it was a name spoken aloud, a banner carried high. He did not live forever, but his dream did. In the soul of every king who followed, in the songs of bards and the scrolls of monks, in the very name, England, his spirit endures. Edgar the Peaceful and the Golden Vision. When Æthelstan died, England trembled. Though he had forged unity through fire and steel, the embers still glowed. Viking lords still watched from the north. Ambition brewed in every noble hall, but his dream had taken root. And from that seed, in time, would grow a kingdom of peace, of law, and of light. That time came not through conquest, but through grace. And it came with Edgarth Boy King, who would rule without blood, and whose reign would become a golden echo through the ages. A crown on the edge. Edgar was born in 943 AD, just 4 years after Æthelstan's death. He was the son of King Edmund I, a warrior king, who had held the realm together through iron will. But Edmund died young, stabbed in a tavern brawl. His brother, Edred, ruled next, then died sickly. When Edwig Edgar's elder brother took the throne, the kingdom began to fracture again. Nobles squabbled. Churchmen were insulted. Even Dunstan, the pious abbot of Glastonbury and future saint, was exiled. England teetered. Then, in 959 AD, Edwig died suddenly. Some say of heartbreak, some say of betrayal, and Edgar, just 16 years old, was crowned king. But the boy had already learned one secret. Strength does not always shout. Sometimes it whispers. The peaceful king. They would come to call him Edgar the Peaceful. And though his reign would last only 16 years, it would be unlike any before. There were no great battles, no civil wars, no Viking invasions. Not because England had grown weak, but because it had grown strong enough not to fight. Edgar ruled over a land, finally breathing after centuries of war. His fleet patrolled the coast with over 600 ships, not to conquer but to guard peace. He restored Dunstan, now Archbishop of Canterbury. He backed church reforms that reshaped monastic life, rooting out corruption and returning purity to the altar. And most of all, he listened to lords, to abbots, to the old and the poor. He governed not as a tyrant but as a steward. The coronation that changed everything. In 973 AD, 14 years after becoming king, Edgar did something extraordinary. He held a second coronation, a ceremonial act of such grandeur and symbolism that echoes of it still remain in British royal tradition to this day. In Bath, surrounded by bishops, nobles, and foreign envoys, Edgar was crowned in a ritual that declared not just his kingship, but the divine unity of England. Afterward, he sailed down the River Dee in a golden barge, rowed by 8 kingslesser rulers who had come to submit, not from fear, but from reverence. One chronicler wrote, "No king before had ever ruled over so many kingdoms, nor with such peace." In that moment, Edgar stood not as a warlord, but as a symbol of the nation, a king of light and law. Under Edgar's reign, monasteries flourished, becoming centers of art, learning, and charity. Laws were codified with precision and fairness, blending Alfred's wisdom with new clarity. Coinage was reformed, unifying the economy under one standard. And justice, real, enforceable justice, reached even the common man. The people called him a just king, not because he was perfect, but because he tried. And in a time where kings often ruled for themselves, Edgar ruled for the realm. He believed England was more than land, more than power. It was a covenant between God, king, and people, a quiet end to a glorious reign. Edgar died in 975 AD, at just 32 years old. There was no final battle, no grand farewell. He slipped into legend like a whisper on the wind. But the kingdom he left behind was stronger than any sword could make it. His son, Edward the Martyr, and later Ethelred the Unready, would inherit that golden vision, though darker days would follow. The Danes would return, the Normans would rise, and England would be tested again and again. But Edgar's time, brief and shining, remained a high-water mark in English kingship. A glimpse of what could be, a promise of what was to come. The final thread. Closing scene. The camera rises over the green hills of England. Ruins, castles, churches, and villages, all remnants of the journey. The voice of the monk returns, soft and eternal. Narrator, calm and poetic. From Hengist's sails to Alfred's walls, from Æthelstan's blade to Edgar's peace. England was not born in a moment. It was forged through war, through wisdom, and through hope. Not just by kings, but by mothers, monks, and the nameless many who tilled the soil and carried the torch. It was a dream written in blood, yes, but sealed in prayer. A land once broken, now whole. This is not just the story of a country. It is the story of an idea. That unity can rise from chaos. That peace is worth the fight. And that from the ashes of a shattered isle, a kingdom can be born. The Kingdom of England.